I kept reading. My eyes were already getting wet. She continued, "My mom works so hard for us. She works every night at the hospital and then comes home and takes care of us, even though she's exhausted. She never complains. She never says she's tired. She just does what needs to be done. But I see it. I see how hard it is for her. I see her fall asleep at the dinner table sometimes. I see her struggle to stay awake at my brother's soccer games. I see her count every dollar, worry about every expense." The letter went on. When she got that parking ticket, she cried. She didn't want us to see her cry, but I heard her in her bedroom. She was crying because she knew she'd have to take $50 from our college savings, from the money she's been saving for me. And I felt so guilty, Judge Caprio. I felt guilty that she worked so hard for my future. I had to stop reading for a moment. I took off my glasses and wiped my eyes. The letter continued. When my mom came home from court that day, she was crying again, but this time she was crying happy tears. She told us what happened. She told us what you said. She told us you called her a hero. Judge Caprio, my mom never thinks of herself as a hero. She just thinks she's doing what she has to do. But you saw her. You really saw her. I was openly crying now. Christina had come back into my office, and when she saw me crying, she said, "Judge, what is it? What's wrong?" I handed her the letter to read. I couldn't speak. She read it, and I watched tears roll down her face, too. Sarah's letter finished with this: "Thank you for seeing my mom. Thank you for recognizing her sacrifice. Thank you for dismissing that ticket. But most of all, thank you for calling her a hero, because she is. She's my hero. She's my little brother's hero. And now we know that a real judge, someone important, someone who sees people every day, thinks she's a hero too. That means the world to us. I'm going to be a doctor one day, Judge Caprio. And when I am, I'm going to treat people the way my mom treats her patients and the way you treated my mom, with compassion and dignity. Thank you for everything. With deep gratitude, Sarah Santos." I sat there with that letter in my hands and I cried. I'm not ashamed to tell you that. I cried because sometimes in this job you wonder if you're making any difference at all. You wonder if anyone even notices when you try to be fair, when you try to be kind, when you try to see the humanity in people. And then you get a letter like this, a letter from a 16-year-old girl telling you that what you did mattered, that it changed something for her family, that it meant something. I called Joyce that night and I read her the letter over the phone. She cried too. She said, "Frank, this is why you do what you do. This is why you still get up every morning after 40 years. Because you're not just enforcing laws, you're touching lives." I framed that letter. It hangs on the wall in my chambers now. I look at it every morning when I come in. It reminds me what this job is really about. But the story doesn't end there. About 2 months later, I was reading the Providence Journal over breakfast, and I saw an article that caught my attention. The headline read, "Rhode Island Hospital Nurses Honored for Excellence in Emergency Care." I started reading, and my heart nearly stopped. There, in the third paragraph, was Maria Santos's name. The article said she and her team were being recognized for their outstanding work during a mass casualty event in March. The article specifically mentioned the car accident with multiple children, the same one Mrs. Santos had told me about. The article quoted the hospital CEO saying, "These nurses exemplify the dedication and skill that makes Rhode Island Hospital a leader in emergency medical care. Their quick thinking and tireless efforts saved lives that day." I cut out that article and I put it up in my chambers next to Sarah's letter. Then about a month after that, I got another letter. This one was from Mrs. Santos herself. She wrote, "Dear Judge Caprio, I hope you remember me. I'm the nurse whose parking ticket you dismissed. I wanted to write and tell you something. When I left your courtroom that day, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. I felt seen. I felt valued. I felt like what I do matters to someone besides me and my patients." She continued, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said to me. You called me a hero. Judge Caprio, I never thought of myself that way. I just thought I was a single mom doing her best, a nurse doing her job. But your words changed something in me. They reminded me that what I do does matter, that the sacrifices I make aren't invisible. Her letter went on, I want you to know that my daughter Sarah watched the video of my court appearance. It's been shared so many times online. She watched you call me a hero and she cried. She said to me, Mom, I always knew you were special, but now the whole world knows. Judge Caprio, you gave my daughter something precious. You gave her pride in her mother. You gave her a moment she'll remember forever. I was crying again reading this letter. Mrs. Santos finished with, I also want to tell you that because of what happened, because of all the attention from that video, something wonderful came from it. A local businessman saw the video and reached out to me. He's setting up a scholarship fund for children of healthcare workers. He said I inspired it. Judge Caprio, that scholarship is going to help kids like my Sarah go to college, kids whose parents work so hard, just like I do. You started something that day in your courtroom. You started a wave of goodness. Thank you for everything. With deep respect and gratitude, Maria Santos. I sat there stunned. A scholarship fund for children of healthcare workers because of what happened in my courtroom that day, because I did what any decent person should do, treated someone with dignity and respect. I called the hospital later that day. I spoke to the administration office and I asked about the scholarship fund. They confirmed it was real. A local business owner named Michael Romano had established it with an initial donation of $100,000. He'd named it the Maria Santos Healthcare Heroes Scholarship Fund. Before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you this. Do you think one moment of kindness can change the world? Do you think treating someone with dignity can create ripples that spread further than you ever imagined? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if you believe in the power of compassion like I do, hit that subscribe button. About 6 months after that initial court date, I got a call from the hospital. They were having an event to formally announce the scholarship fund, and they wanted me to attend. They specifically asked if I would present the first scholarship award. I said yes immediately. I didn't even have to think about it. The event was on a Saturday afternoon in September. I wore my best suit. Joyce came with me. We drove to Rhode Island Hospital and went to their conference center. The room was packed. There were nurses there, doctors, hospital administrators, local media, and families. I saw Mrs. Santos across the room and our eyes met. She smiled at me and I smiled back. She looked different than she had in my courtroom. She looked rested. She looked happy. She looked proud. The hospital CEO gave a speech about the importance of supporting healthcare workers and their families. Then Michael Romano, the businessman who'd started the fund, spoke. He told the story of seeing the video from my courtroom. He said he'd been so moved by Mrs. Santos's story, by her sacrifice and dedication, that he knew he had to do something. He said, I've been fortunate in my life. My business has been successful, but I've been looking for a way to give back that felt meaningful, that felt right. When I saw Judge Caprio recognize Maria Santos for her heroism, when I saw him dismiss that ticket and treat her with such dignity, I knew what I had to do. This scholarship fund is my way of honoring every healthcare worker out there who sacrifices for others, who gives everything they have, who holds our community together. Then he called me up to present the first scholarship. I walked to the front of the room and I took the microphone. I looked out at all those faces and I said, 6 months ago, a woman walked into my courtroom. She was there because she'd gotten a parking ticket. But as I listened to her story, as I heard about her life, her work, her children, I realized I wasn't just hearing about a parking violation. I was hearing about heroism, real everyday heroism. I continued, Maria Santos represents what's best about humanity. She sacrifices her sleep, her comfort, her own needs to care for her children and to save lives. She does it without complaint, without seeking recognition, without expecting anything in return. When I dismissed her ticket that day, I did it because justice demanded it. She didn't deserve to be punished. She deserved to be celebrated. I said, I never imagined that moment would lead to this. I never imagined that treating someone with basic human dignity would create a scholarship fund that will help dozens of families. But that's the power of goodness. When you do the right thing, when you treat people with respect and compassion, you start ripples that spread far beyond what you can see. The room was quiet. Everyone was listening intently. I said, "It is my great honor to present the first Maria Santos Healthcare Heroes Scholarship in the amount of $10,000 to Sarah Santos, daughter of Maria Santos, to support her education as she pursues her dream of becoming a doctor." The room erupted in applause. Sarah stood up from her seat and walked to the front. She was crying. Her mother was crying. I was crying. Joyce was crying. Everyone in that room was feeling it. Sarah took the scholarship certificate from me, and she hugged me. She whispered in my ear, "Thank you for seeing my mom. Thank you for seeing us." I said back to her, "Thank you for writing me that letter. It meant more than you'll ever know." Then Maria Santos came up and she hugged me too. She said, "Judge Caprio, you changed our lives. You changed everything." I said to her, "Mrs. Santos, you changed mine too. You reminded me why this work matters. You reminded me that small acts of kindness can create big waves of change. You're the hero here, not me." After the event, we all took pictures together. The media interviewed me, and I told them the same thing I'm telling you now. I said I didn't do anything special. I just treated a good person the way good people deserve to be treated. Maria Santos is the extraordinary one. She's the one who works miracles every day. The story got picked up by national media after that. I did a few interviews. People from all over the country reached out to tell me it had inspired them. Other cities started their own scholarship funds for healthcare workers' children. It became something bigger than any of us had imagined. But you know what meant the most to me? It wasn't the media attention or the recognition. It was knowing that Sarah Santos would go to college. It was knowing that the scholarship fund would help other kids whose parents sacrificed everything. It was knowing that one moment of basic human decency had created something lasting and good. I think about that day often. I think about Mrs. Santos standing in my courtroom, exhausted and scared, worried about $50. I think about how close we came to her just paying that ticket and walking away, another transaction in the justice system. But because I listened, because I asked questions, because I saw her as a person and not just a case number, everything changed. My father's words keep coming back to me. He told me that what matters is how you treat people when nobody's watching. Well, someone was watching that day. A person in my gallery was recording on their phone, but I didn't know that. I wasn't performing for cameras. I was just doing what felt right, what my conscience demanded, what basic human decency required. And that's the lesson I want you to take from this. You never know when your actions are going to matter more than you realize. You never know when treating someone with dignity is going to change their life or inspire someone else or start a movement that helps hundreds of people. You just have to do the right thing every single time, whether anyone is watching or not. You know what keeps me doing this job after 40 years? Moments like these. Seeing that compassion actually works. Seeing that treating people with dignity creates positive change. Seeing that justice isn't just about enforcing rules, it's about understanding humanity. If this story is restoring your faith in justice, show me by hitting that subscribe button and that like button. Share this with someone who needs to see it. I still see Mrs. Santos occasionally. She came to my courtroom one more time about a year later, but this time as a guest, not a defendant. She brought her daughter Sarah, who was home from her first year of college. Sarah was studying pre-med at Brown University. Brown University, full scholarship from multiple sources, including the fund that bore her mother's name. They came to my chambers and we talked for an hour. Sarah told me about her classes, about her dreams of becoming an emergency room doctor, just like the ones her mother worked with. She said, "Judge Caprio, I want to be able to save lives like my mom does. I want to make her proud." I said to her, "Sarah, your mother has been proud of you since the day you were born, but now you have a chance to honor her sacrifice by living your dreams. That's the greatest gift you can give her." Mrs. Santos told me that day that she'd been promoted at the hospital. She was now a charge nurse, leading a team in the emergency department. She said the recognition from the scholarship fund had led to recognition at work. People saw her story and they saw her worth. She said something to me that day I'll never forget. She said, "Judge Caprio, for so many years I felt invisible. I felt like I was working so hard and nobody noticed, nobody cared. I was just another nurse, just another single mom struggling to get by. But you saw me. You told me I mattered. And that changed how I saw myself. I started believing I was worth something. I started believing my work had value. I started carrying myself differently. And people noticed that promotion. It came because I started believing in myself the way you believed in me." I had tears in my eyes listening to her. I said, "Mrs. Santos, I didn't give you anything you didn't already have. I just pointed out what was already there. You were always a hero. You were always valuable. You were always worthy of respect. I just said it out loud." She hugged me then and she said, "Sometimes that's all people need, Judge. Someone to say out loud what they've been too tired or too beaten down to believe about themselves." That conversation stays with me. It reminds me of the power we all have to lift each other up with our words, with our recognition, with our respect. The scholarship fund has now given out over 50 scholarships. 50 children of healthcare workers have gone to college because of what started in my courtroom that day. 50 families have been given hope and opportunity. And it all started because I listened to one exhausted nurse tell me why she got a parking ticket. I've been doing this job for 40 years. I've made thousands of rulings. I've heard tens of thousands of cases. Most of them I forget within days. But some cases, some people, they stay with you forever. Maria Santos and her daughter Sarah, they're part of my heart now. They're part of my story. They're part of why I still believe in the goodness of people, in the power of compassion, in the possibility of justice that actually serves humanity. Here's what I've learned in my 40 years on the bench. The law is important. Rules matter. Order in society requires that we all follow certain standards. But the law isn't the end of the story. It's a tool. And like any tool, it has to be used with wisdom, with discretion, with an understanding of human context. When Maria Santos got that parking ticket, the law said she violated a parking ordinance. That's technically true. But the law doesn't tell the whole story. The law doesn't capture the fact that she was saving a child's life. The law doesn't capture her sacrifice as a single mother. The law doesn't capture her dedication as a healthcare worker. That's where judicial discretion comes in. That's where humanity has to override rigid rule following. I could have made her pay that ticket. Nobody would have questioned it. It was technically a valid citation, but I would have failed as a judge if I had done that. I would have failed to see the person. I would have failed to administer real justice. And I would have missed the opportunity to recognize heroism when it was standing right in front of me. So let me ask you this. Do you think I was right to dismiss that ticket? Do you think compassion should sometimes override strict rule enforcement? I'm genuinely curious what you think. And here's another question for you. If you were in my position, what would you have done? Would you have listened to her story the way I did? Would you have seen her humanity? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. I actually read them, every single one. If this story meant something to you, if you believe in justice that sees the whole person like I do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Turn on that bell icon so you never miss another story from my courtroom. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message, someone who works in healthcare, someone who's a single parent struggling to make ends meet, someone who feels invisible and needs to know they matter. And check out the next video on your screen. I've got another incredible story from my courtroom that you won't believe. I'll see you tomorrow with another lesson about justice, respect, and what really matters in this life. I'm Frank Caprio. I've been on this bench for 40 years because I believe something simple. We're all equal before the law, every single one of us, rich or poor, powerful or powerless. That's what makes this country work. Thank you for listening to my story. God bless you, and remember, respect costs nothing, but it's worth everything. You know, after 40 years on this bench, I thought I'd seen every kind of person walk through those courtroom doors. The angry ones, the scared ones, the ones who think they can talk their way out of anything. But on the morning of March 12th, a woman walked into my courtroom who reminded me exactly why I still put on these robes every single day. What she told me, the sacrifice she'd made, the life she was living, it hit me right in the heart. And when I delivered my verdict, when I said those words to her, I saw something in her eyes that I'll never forget. Let me tell you exactly what happened that day, because this is a story about heroism, about sacrifice, and about the kind of people who hold our entire society together without ever asking for recognition or praise. But before I tell you this whole story, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because what I'm about to share with you is something that needs to be heard. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single word of this. I've been a municipal court judge in Providence, Rhode Island since 1985. That's 40 years of seeing humanity at its best and its worst. Every morning I wake up at 6:15. I've been doing it so long my body doesn't even need an alarm anymore. My wife Joyce makes the coffee and we sit together for 20 minutes before I head to the courthouse. It's our time, those 20 minutes. We don't talk about anything heavy, just life, just us. I get to the courthouse at 8:15 every morning. My clerk Christina is always there before me. She's been with me for 18 years now. She knows exactly how I like things. The case files arranged by time, my water glass filled, the temperature in the courtroom set to exactly 68 degrees. I know it sounds particular, but when you've been doing this as long as I have, you develop routines that keep you grounded. My father came to this country from Italy in 1946 with $17 in his pocket and a wife who was 6 months pregnant with my older brother. He worked construction for 35 years, never missed a day, not one. He used to tell me something every single morning before I went to school. He'd put his hand on my shoulder and say, "Francesco, remember this. It doesn't matter how much money a man has. What matters is how he treats people when nobody's watching." I didn't fully understand what he meant until I became a judge. That particular morning, March 12th, I remember the weather was just starting to turn. Spring was trying to break through. You could feel it in the air, that promise of warmth coming. I had my coffee with Joyce, kissed her goodbye like I do every morning, and drove my usual route to the courthouse. I parked in the same spot I've been parking in for decades. Some things you just don't change. When I walked into my chambers that morning, Christina had already laid out the morning docket. 12 cases, pretty standard for a Wednesday. Parking violations mostly, a few speeding tickets, one failure to appear that had been rescheduled. I went through each file carefully. I always do. Every case represents a real person with a real life and real circumstances. I learned early in my career that you can never judge just by looking at a piece of paper. I put on my robes at 8:55. I've had the same robes for 15 years. They're worn in all the right places now. Comfortable. I stood in front of the mirror in my chambers for a moment, like I do every morning, and I said a little prayer. I pray for wisdom. I pray for compassion. I pray that I'll see the humanity in every person who stands before me. Then I walked out into the courtroom. The gallery was already filling up. I could see people checking their phones, talking quietly, some looking nervous. I took my seat at the bench and looked out at all those faces. Every single one of them had a story. Every single one of them had a reason they were there. And it was my job to listen, to understand, and to make fair decisions. Christina called the first case at 9 sharp. Mr. Antonelli, parking violation on Federal Hill. I remember him. Nice older gentleman who'd parked in a handicapped spot without a placard. He explained his wife had just had surgery, and he was rushing to pick up her medication. I asked him a few questions, verified his story, reduced his fine. These are the moments where common sense has to override rigid rules. The morning moved along smoothly, case after case. I listened to each person, looked them in the eye, tried to understand their situation. By 10:30, we were on case number 7. That's when Christina called out, "Maria Santos, parking violation, expired meter on Elmwood Avenue." I looked up from my notes and I saw her walk in. She was a woman probably in her early 40s, wearing light blue scrubs under a worn winter jacket that had seen better days. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, no makeup. She looked exhausted. I mean truly exhausted. The kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. She carried a small purse that was fraying at the edges, and she walked with purpose, but also with the weight of someone carrying more than they should. She approached the defendant's table, and I could see her hands were shaking slightly. She wasn't looking at me yet. She was looking down at the table, and I noticed her taking deep breaths, like she was trying to steady herself. I've seen that look before. It's the look of someone who's just trying to hold it together. I looked down at the file in front of me. Maria Santos, age 42, parking violation issued at 7:15 a.m. on Elmwood Avenue. The meter had expired at 6:45 a.m. Fine of $35 plus $15 court costs, total $50. I looked at the address listed. She lived in South Providence, not far from where the violation occurred. I leaned forward slightly and I said, "Mrs. Santos, good morning." My voice was gentle. I wanted her to know this wasn't an interrogation. She looked up at me then, and her eyes, I'll never forget her eyes. They were brown and kind, but so tired. She said, "Good morning, Your Honor," and her voice was soft but steady. There was a slight accent there. I could hear it. I said, "I see here you received a parking ticket on Elmwood Avenue for an expired meter. Can you tell me what happened that morning?" She nodded, and she took another one of those deep breaths. She said, "Your Honor, I work at Rhode Island Hospital. I'm a nurse in the emergency department. I work the night shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. I was already listening more carefully now. I could tell there was more to this story. She continued, "That morning, March 3rd, my shift was supposed to end at 7 a.m. I had parked on Elmwood Avenue at 10:45 the night before. I put money in the meter for the maximum time, which was 8 hours. That should have been enough." I said, "But your shift ran over?" She nodded, and I saw her eyes get a little wet. She said, "At 6:30 that morning, we got a trauma code, a car accident, multiple victims. It was bad, Your Honor, really bad. There were children involved." The courtroom had gone completely quiet. Everyone was listening now. She said, "I couldn't leave. My patients needed me. There was a little boy. He was only 7 years old, and he was coding on the table. I was helping the doctor try to save his life. I couldn't just walk away and say, 'Sorry, I have to go move my car.'" Her voice broke a little when she said that last part. I felt something tighten in my chest. She continued, "We worked on him for 45 minutes. 45 minutes I was trying to help save that child's life. And we did. We got him back. We stabilized him. By the time I could even think about anything else, by the time I could step away, it was 7:30. I ran to my car as fast as I could, and the ticket was already on my windshield." I sat back in my chair and I just looked at her for a moment. I was thinking about my own children, my grandchildren. I was thinking about what it would mean to have someone like her fighting to save their life. I was thinking about the choice she'd made that morning to stay with her patients instead of worrying about a parking ticket. I said, "Mrs. Santos, that little boy, how is he?" A small smile broke through the exhaustion on her face. She said, "He's recovering, Your Honor. He's going to be okay. His family, they don't even know my name, but I see him sometimes when I'm at work. He's going to be fine." I felt my throat get tight. I had to clear it before I spoke. I said, "Mrs. Santos, do you mind if I ask you a few more questions?" She shook her head. "Of course not, Your Honor." I said, "How long have you been a nurse?" She said, 18 years, Your Honor. I became a nurse when I was 24. I said, "And you work the night shift?" She nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. I've worked nights for the last 12 years. I asked her, "Is there a reason you work nights instead of days?" I saw her hesitate for just a moment. Then she said, "I'm a single mother, Your Honor. I have 2 children, a daughter who's 16 and a son who's 12. If I work nights, I can be there when they leave for school in the morning, and I can be there when they get home in the afternoon. I can help them with their homework. I can make them dinner. I can be their mom." I felt something in my chest expand. I said, "You work all night at the hospital, and then you come home and take care of your children all day. When do you sleep?" She gave a little laugh, but there was no humor in it. She said, "I sleep from about 4 p.m. until 9 p.m., Your Honor. That's my sleep time. The kids know not to disturb me unless it's an emergency. It's not much, but it's enough I manage." 5 hours of sleep. This woman was surviving on 5 hours of sleep so she could work full-time and be a full-time mother. I said, "Mrs. Santos, what about your children's father? Does he help?" Her face changed then. I saw something hard flash across it. She said, "Hey, he's not in the picture, Your Honor. He hasn't been for 8 years. It's just me and my kids." I nodded slowly. I was building a picture in my mind of this woman's life, working 12-hour shifts in one of the most stressful environments imaginable, the emergency department of a major hospital, coming home exhausted, sleeping for 5 hours, waking up to be a mother, helping with homework, making meals, attending school conferences, being everything to her children, and then doing it all over again. I said, "Mrs. Santos, can I ask about your financial situation? Can you afford this ticket?" I saw her jaw tighten. She was trying to maintain her dignity, and I respected that. She said, "Your Honor, I'll be honest with you. $50 it's a lot for me right now. We're trying to save money because my daughter wants to go to college. She's so smart, Your Honor. She has a 4.0 GPA. She wants to be a doctor. I'm trying to save every penny I can to help her." I felt my eyes start to water. I've been doing this job for 40 years, and I'm not ashamed to say that I get emotional. When you see real character, real sacrifice, real love, it moves you. This woman was giving everything she had, every ounce of her energy, every dollar she earned for her children. I said, "Mrs. Santos, I want to make sure I understand correctly. On the morning of March 3rd, you were 30 minutes past your meter expiration because you were helping save a child's life. Is that correct?" She nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." I picked up my pen and I wrote something on the file in front of me. Then I looked back up at her and I said, "Mrs. Santos, I want you to listen to me very carefully." She was looking right at me, her eyes wide. I said, "I've been a judge for 40 years. I've seen thousands of people stand where you're standing right now. Some of them have good excuses. Some of them have bad excuses. Some of them have no excuse at all. But in 40 years, I have never, and I mean never, heard a better reason for a parking violation than the one you just gave me." I saw her eyes fill with tears. I continued, "You stayed late because you were saving a life. You put your patient, a child you didn't even know, ahead of your own concerns. You made a choice that defines what it means to be a healthcare worker. You made a choice that defines what it means to be a hero." She put her hand over her mouth. Tears were rolling down her cheeks now. I said, "Mrs. Santos, I'm dismissing this ticket. You owe nothing, not 1 penny. She let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She said, "Your Honor, thank you so much." I held up my hand. I said, "Wait, I'm not finished." She looked at me with surprise. I said, "I want everyone in this courtroom to hear what I'm about to say. Mrs. Santos, you are a hero. You are the kind of person who makes this world work. You sacrifice sleep. You sacrifice comfort. You sacrifice your own needs for your children and for complete strangers who come into your emergency room. You do it without complaining, without asking for recognition, without expecting anything in return." The courtroom was absolutely silent. Everyone was listening. I continued, "You work nights so you can be there for your kids during the day. You save every penny so your daughter can follow her dreams. You stay late to save lives, even when it means getting a parking ticket. That is character, Mrs. Santos. That is what real character looks like." She was crying openly now, but she was also smiling. It was the most beautiful thing I'd seen in a long time. I said, "I want your children to know that their mother stood in this courtroom today and that a judge called her a hero, because that's exactly what she is. And I want you to know the ticket is dismissed, not as a favor, but because justice demands it. You didn't do anything wrong. You did everything right." Now let me pause here for just a second. I need to ask you something. Have you ever met someone who just restored your faith in humanity? Someone who reminded you that there are still good people in this world doing good things? Leave me a comment because I actually read them. And if you're enjoying this story, hit that like button for me. Mrs. Santos was still standing there, and I could see she was trying to compose herself. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and she said, "Your Honor, I don't know what to say. Thank you doesn't seem like enough." I said to her, and I meant every word, "Mrs. Santos, I should be thanking you. You reminded me this morning why I still do this job. You reminded me what real sacrifice looks like. Your children are lucky to have you as their mother. Your patients are lucky to have you as their nurse, and this community is lucky to have you in it." She nodded, and I could see she was overwhelmed with emotion. She said, "Can I say something, Your Honor?" I said, "Of course." She took a breath and she said, "I was so scared coming here today. I was scared I'd have to pay this ticket and it would take away from my daughter's college fund. I was scared you wouldn't understand. I was scared I'd be treated like I did something wrong, but you listened to me, you saw me, not just a case number, but a real person. That means more to me than you'll ever know." I had to take a moment myself. My own eyes were wet now. I said, "Mrs. Santos, that's my job. That's what I'm supposed to do. See the person, not just the violation. Understand the circumstances, not just the rule that was broken. I'm just sorry you had to take time away from your sleep and your children to come here today for something that never should have been a ticket in the first place." She said, "I'd do it again, Your Honor. I'd make the same choice every time." I said, "Oh, I know you would. That's what makes you who you are." I signed the dismissal and I said, "Mrs. Santos, you're free to go. Case dismissed. Get some rest. Give your children a hug from me, and thank you for everything you do." She said, "Thank you, Your Honor. God bless you." And then she turned and walked out of my courtroom. I watched her go, and I felt something I don't always feel in this job. I felt hope. I felt like, despite all the bad we see, all the selfishness and greed and cruelty, there are still people like Maria Santos holding everything together with their bare hands. I looked out at the gallery, and I could see people wiping their eyes. My clerk, Christina, was dabbing at her face with a tissue. Even the police officer standing by the door looked emotional. I took a deep breath, and I said, "Let's take a 10-minute recess. I need a moment." I stood up, and I went back to my chambers. I sat down at my desk, and I thought about what had just happened. I thought about Mrs. Santos working all night, running on 5 hours of sleep, doing everything she could for her children and her patients. I thought about my own father and the lessons he'd taught me about character and hard work. I thought about how easy it would have been to just make her pay the ticket, to say, rules are rules, to ignore her circumstances. But that's not justice. Real justice isn't blind adherence to rules. Real justice sees the person. Real justice understands context. Real justice knows the difference between someone who deserves punishment and someone who deserves recognition. Christina knocked on my door and came in. She said, "Judge, that was beautiful. I've worked with you for 18 years, and that might be my favorite moment." I smiled at her. I said, "Christina, did you see her scrubs? Did you see how worn they were? Did you see her coat with the frayed edges? That woman is working herself to the bone, and she's still worried about saving money for her daughter's education. That's love. That's real love." Christina nodded. She said, "My mother was a nurse. I know what that life is like. The long hours, the emotional toll, the physical exhaustion, and she's doing it alone, raising 2 kids. I don't know how she does it." I said, "She does it because she has to, because her children need her and her patients need her, because she's made of something stronger than most people." We sat there for a few minutes just reflecting. Then I stood up and I said, "All right, let's get back out there. We have more cases to hear." I walked back into the courtroom and I took my seat. The rest of the morning was standard cases, parking violations, minor traffic offenses, nothing that stood out, but I couldn't stop thinking about Mrs. Santos. Her face kept coming back to me, the exhaustion in her eyes, the pride in her voice when she talked about her daughter wanting to be a doctor, the way she'd cried when I dismissed her ticket. At noon, we broke for lunch. I usually eat in my chambers. I brought a sandwich from home like I do every day. Joyce makes them for me every morning. Today it was turkey on wheat with mustard and lettuce. I was sitting there eating and thinking when my phone rang. It was my daughter Angela. She's a teacher at an elementary school in Cranston. I answered and said, "Hi, sweetheart, what's up?" She said, "Dad, I just saw something on social media. Someone posted about your courtroom this morning, about a nurse whose ticket you dismissed. It's going viral." I said, "Well, what do you mean viral?" She said, "Someone in the gallery recorded part of it on their phone and posted it. It's been shared thousands of times already. People are calling it the most beautiful court moment they've ever seen." I didn't know what to say. I hadn't even realized anyone was recording. I said, "Angela, I was just doing my job. I was just treating her like she deserved to be treated." She said, "Dad, that's exactly why people are responding to it. Because you showed compassion. Because you saw her as a person. That's rare, and people are hungry for it." After I hung up with Angela, I sat there thinking about what she'd said. I didn't dismiss that ticket because I wanted attention or recognition. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Mrs. Santos didn't deserve to be punished. She deserved to be celebrated. The afternoon court session was quieter. We finished up the remaining cases by 3 p.m. I went back to my chambers and started working on some paperwork. But my mind kept drifting back to that morning, to Mrs. Santos standing in front of me with tears in her eyes. I'm going to be honest with you. At this point, I was feeling something I don't always feel. I was feeling like maybe, just maybe, I'd made a real difference in someone's life. If you've ever had that feeling, you know what I'm talking about. Hit that like button if you're still with me, and make sure you're subscribed, because what happens next, I never saw coming in my entire career. About a week later, I was sitting in my chambers, going through the morning docket when Christina came in with an envelope. She said, "Judge, this came for you. It's addressed to you personally." I took the envelope and I looked at it. There was no return address. I opened it and inside was a handwritten letter. I unfolded it and started reading. It said, "Dear Judge Caprio, my name is Sarah Santos. I am the daughter of Maria Santos, the woman whose parking ticket you dismissed last week. I wanted to write to you because I don't think you understand what you did for my mother, for me, and for my little brother." I smiled at her. I said, "Christina, did you see her scrubs? Did you see how worn they were? Did you see her coat with the frayed edges? That woman is working herself to the bone, and she's still worried about saving money for her daughter's education. That's love. That's real love." Christina nodded. She said, "My mother was a nurse. I know what that life is like. The long hours, the emotional toll, the physical exhaustion. And she's doing it alone, raising 2 kids. I don't know how she does it." I said, "She does it because she has to, because her children need her, and her patients need her, because she's made of something stronger than most people." We sat there for a few minutes, just reflecting. Then I stood up and I said, "All right, let's get back out there. We have more cases to hear."